Damien Hine.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I'm very grateful that time has been found for this important debate before recess. And I should just mention, as the Shadow Leader said, that along with the Right Honourable Member for Allen and Deeside, the Honourable Member for Edinburgh East and our Right Honourable friend for Poole, I'm one of the 4 Members of Parliament sitting on the sponsor body. Now, while the works to the Houses of Parliament remain critical, clearly a lot else has changed, and it's prudent to review the current approach at this stage, reaffirming the commitment to taxpayer value. And although obviously this is also our workplace, actually about 3/4 of the people working in the Houses of Parliament are neither Members of Parliament nor peers. And against 650 of us, something like 1 million people visit this place every year. This place is the focal point of our constitution and, for the wider world, a permanent symbol of liberal democracy. The Houses of Parliament form a democratic asset that we hold in trust. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, the median tenure of an MP, notwithstanding my right honourable friend for Gainsborough, the median tenure of an MP in modern times is around 13 years. And of those 13, the median current member has already had about 5 of them. So given that even on the very shortest scenario for restoration and renewal, it would be something like a decade before the works were completed, the sobering reality is that many current MPs just won't be around to see them finished. And on the longer scenarios, hardly any current MPs would be around. So this is not about us. We are trustees of this place, and clearly we have to do what is right, not what happens to be convenient for us as its current temporary occupants. The current patch and mend approach is failing. According to the National Audit Office, Parliament spent £369 million in the last 3 years on projects to keep the buildings in use, and there is still a repairs backlog of £1 billion. The fire at Notre Dame in Paris. I will.
It's just the point that we found constantly when I was on the Joint Committee and as Chair of Finance was when we wanted additional work to be done now, because it's clearly important, for instance on the cloisters, which are one of the most beautiful parts of the whole estate, there simply wasn't enough physical capacity on the estate to be able to get that work done now. So the danger of further delay is that this backlog is going to get bigger and bigger and bigger, isn't it?
Deputy Speaker, he's undeniably right about the effect of the passage of time, and of course that is all reflected in the outline business case. The fire at Notre Dame was a stark reminder of the importance of protecting the world's most treasured historic buildings. And here, the risk of fire is so acute that fire wardens patrol 24 hours a day. This House rightly recognised the significance of that terrible event and passed the Restoration and Renewal Act shortly afterwards. A vast amount of work, as colleagues will know, is also needed to replace all the heating, ventilation, water and drainage and electrical systems. It's been almost 5 years since the plan was drawn up, and much has changed since, including 2 general elections, our leaving of the European Union, and of course, this current pandemic, which is both illustrating the possibility of different ways of working and also placing very severe new demands on the public purse. There's also more evidence now about the state of the buildings through extensive modelling and surveys, and more is known about the cost and the challenge of building like-for-like temporary chambers. The bodies charged with overseeing and delivering this work, as mentioned by both the Leader and the Shadow Leader, have become substantive in just the last few months, and it is now appropriate to review where we are and how we proceed. So, there have always been essentially the same 3 overall pivotal questions which affect the length and the cost of the works involved. First, there is the balance between restoration and renewal. In other words, the extent to which the project goes beyond just fixing the buildings to improving things, for example, on disability access, which is currently woeful, as well as various other enhancements. Second is pace. Whether to proceed at a slow speed estimated at some 30 years, working around current operations with the extended disruption and risks that entails, or to move out in whole or in part for a period that would expedite the project and can make the project lower cost overall, but brings that cost forward. And third, during any decant period, how closely does Parliament's physical layout and function have to be replicated? And how far does the location have to be kept close to the government departments that we are here to scrutinise and hold to account? Value for money and affordability have always been vital, but have only become more pressing as the full economic impact of the post-COVID environment becomes more evident. Of course, Madam Deputy Speaker, we can all say what we want to see retained and what we want to see enhanced, and of course that is important. But for this review to be effective in delivering value for money, we also need to say, assuming we do decant somewhere, we need to say what we could do without. And there are some factors that could make a material difference, and I'd encourage honourable members in this debate, and we're making submissions to the review, when thinking about decant, to consider particularly these. First, while in-person voting is a long-standing feature of our system, how sacred is the exact system and the layout of our lobbies? Because seeking to replicate the current lobby configuration is a significant factor in the space requirements for a temporary chamber. Secondly, what flexibilities could there be in the numbers of MPs' staff that have to be accommodated on the estate? Because more flexibility on that could mean lower cost. Now, the letter yesterday from the Prime Minister to the sponsor body and delivery authority, which my right honourable friend mentioned, called for the full range of options to be looked at, from a minimum safe viable product to fundamental refurbishment, and the different possibilities of full decant, partial decant and remaining in situ, all, of course, kept with costs kept to a minimum. Now, these different approaches have been analysed already and will be re-evaluated in the light of what more we now know. And I want to reassure colleagues that that doesn't mean only looking at one decant option. Now, the suggestion to examine decant locations beyond Westminster has not been part of the programme's mandate to date, and the programme will, of course, be discussing this further with Mr Speaker and the Lord's Speaker. I will very briefly.
The right honourable gentleman for giving way. Doesn't he agree, though, that if we keep opening up all of these other options and looking at starting from first basics on new ones, we will simply delay it, and the cost of doing that alone will be enormous?
She makes a good point, and in her position on the Public Accounts Committee, that doesn't surprise me, and she's right, of course, about some of those trade-offs. But it is quite an aggressive timetable for this review, and obviously, for analysis to be effective and for realistic options to be presented back, it's going to be necessary, iteratively, to narrow down those options in very short time. I also want to stress that the views of members here are very important to this process, and obviously today's debate is a big and central part of that. Beyond that, I'd also encourage colleagues to look at making a submission to the review in fuller detail, if they wish, by the 7th of August. The review team will be working through the summer and will be subject to challenges, as was mentioned by an independent panel, and plan to report back in the autumn.